Professor Noam Chomsky, I'm wondering whether there are any lessons about activism that you think we should learn from Western Europe. They seem to be very far ahead of us in terms of political organizing and strategies. No, I don't agree. We're always looking for a savior somewhere, and there isn't any. I mean, there are a lot of things that have developed in the United States which have not developed in Western Europe, and the popular movements here are much healthier in many respects than the European ones. Theirs are very ideology ridden. They've got text and theories, all kinds of stuff we don't have, and which we're lucky we don't have. There's really a lot of very successful organizing here over the years, but there are mass demonstrations here. Yeah, but we've had mass demonstrations too. We just had one in Washington a couple days ago in support of abortion rights. We know how to do that stuff. It's not very hard. I mean, there are no big secrets about any of this. There are very few lessons to transmit so far as I know. Look, people have been involved in very successful organizing in the United States, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the ecological movement, the feminist movement. All these things have been very successful developments. What about all the Western European social welfare policies, though? What about all the Western European social welfare policies? Though it's true they have a lot of social welfare programs we don't have, but that's true of Canada too. You don't even have to go all the way to Europe. For instance, Canada has a functioning public health insurance program. We don't even have that in the United States, but see, that has to do with the extreme power of private capital here and with the fact that the capitalist class in the United States is an extraordinarily class conscious, while the working class are very diffuse and weak. So private capital is kicking ass, the working class getting their asses kicked. So the result is we don't have a lot of things that by now are pretty much taken for granted in every other industrial country. We got more homeless in America and less health. Now, if you look at the specific historical particularities in the United States that have made it that way, and that's worth doing, but really it's not a big secret how to go about getting those kinds of programs. And if you want to understand what a reasonably rational national healthcare program would look like, you don't have to go very far. There's a good start, at least right across the border. Man, why does Canada have programs like that, though? Well, there you have to look at the history. You have to ask, how has the history of Canada been different from the history of the United States? And there's been a lot of differences. For instance, one difference had to do with the American Revolution. In the American Revolution, a large number of people fled to Canada. Lots, in fact, and a lot of them fled because they didn't like the doctrinaire, kind of a fanatic environment that took hold in the colonies. The percentage of colonists who fled in the American Revolution was actually about 4%. It was probably higher than the percentage of Vietnamese who fled Vietnam after the Vietnam War. And remember, they were fleeing from one of the richest places in the world. These were boat people who fled in terror from Boston Harbor in the middle of winter to Nova Scotia, where they died in the snow trying to get away from all these crazies here. The numbers are supposed to have been in the neighborhood of maybe 100,000 out of a total population of 2.5 million, so it's a substantial part of the population. 100,000, and among the people who ran from the United States to Canada during the American Revolution were the ones who knew that they were going to get it in the neck if the colonists had won. Black folks and Native Americans, for example. And they were right. In the case of the Native Americans, genocide. In the case of black folks, slavery. So that's interesting. The history of Canada has a lot of Native Americans and black folks running there, away from our, barely, our somewhat revolutionary revolution. And actually, that wasn't the only big migration to Canada which contributed to some of the differences. There was also another major one around the turn of the century coming out of the American Midwest after the Populist movement collapsed. The Populists were a political movement that formed out of the agrarian protests in the 1880s. It broke apart after 1896. The Populists were the last gasp of large-scale popular democratic politics in the United States, and they were mainly centered in the Midwest, radical Kansas farmers, that sort of thing. And when they were finally defeated and the Populist Party dissolved. A lot of them just left. I don't know the numbers in this case, but a fair number of them went to Canada. In fact, they became part of the basis for the Canadian Social Democratic Movement, which developed after that and was responsible for pushing through a lot of the social welfare programs in Canada. So you got, some righteous, badass Native Americans. You got some badass black folks, Native Americans coming to Canada from the U.S. Revolution. And then the populist movement lost, which I didn't know that. The farmers were trying to stand up, right, and do something. But they went to Canada too. Apart from that, there were a lot of other things that had made Canada different. For instance, the United States has always been a much more advanced capitalist country by far. Corporations in the modern sense were an American invention. Never since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, corporate America has always been much more powerful than its Canadian counterpart. Corporations, we invented democracy, the apple pie, democracy, corporations. There was much richer country. I don't know if that was a joke. Okay, so there was a much richer country. The U.S. kept trying to invade Canada. Canada is much more sparsely settled and much less populous than the United States. It was part of the British Empire. They have the French-English split with Quebec there and so on. So there's a lot of historical and other differences between America and Canada. So I think it's a good question to look into more detail. But the fact is there are advantages and disadvantages to the two countries. A lot of things have been won in the United States that are good and a model for other places. And as far as organizing is concerned, it's the kind of thing you could do relatively freely here, free of the fear of very much direct state repression. So there are things you can learn everywhere. You can learn things from Nicaragua. You can learn things from Vietnam. You can learn things from Western Europe. And you can learn things from Canada. But if you want to go somewhere for salvation, you're not going to find it. You're not going to find it. There you go, Noam Chomsky. Smashing dreams, killing hope. Killing hope and smashing dreams.